What if the most important story ever told wasn't found in a history book, a science journal, or a philosophy text, but in a collection of ancient writings that modern minds often dismiss as mythology? What if the questions that keep you awake at 3 a.m., why do I exist? Why is there suffering? Why do good people endure terrible things? Why does love hurt? Why do we all seem broken? What if all these questions were answered in one epic narrative that spans from the birth of time itself to a family drama in ancient Egypt? You're about to hear the story that explains everything. The template for every movie you've ever watched, every novel you've ever read, every struggle you've ever faced. This is Genesis. And once you truly understand it, you'll never see your own life the same way again. Are you ready to discover who you really are? Who was there before time began? Before space existed? Before matter, energy, or even the concept of existence itself? The answer will shock you. Someone. Not something, someone. A being so powerful that words were his weapons, so creative that imagination was his raw material, so loving that relationship was his motivation. In the beginning was God. Not gods, God. Singular. Complete. Needing nothing, lacking nothing, but choosing to create everything. The impossible act of creation. But what was this God about to do? Something that defies every law of physics, every principle of logic. Create everything from nothing. Ex nihilo, as scholars call it. No raw materials. No blueprint from another universe. No cosmic recycling program. Just, let there be light. And light wasn't just illumination, it was the birth of physics itself. Time began. Space expanded. Reality as we know it exploded into existence with 3 simple words. The birth of time itself. When did this happen? That's the wrong question. Time itself was created in that moment. There was no when before creation, only the eternal now of God's existence. But once those words were spoken, time began its relentless march forward, carrying with it the possibility of history, memory, hope, and regret. No space, no location, no dimensions. But when God spoke, the universe itself became the where, the vast stage upon which every subsequent story would play out. On the first day, light was called from darkness. On the second, the heavens were stretched. On the third, land rose from the waters, adorned with life. The fourth saw the dance of sun, moon, and stars begin. The fifth filled the skies and seas with creatures. And on the sixth, all animals big and small appeared, and finally the masterpiece. From dust, simple, ordinary dust, God shaped a form, breathed into it, and mankind awakened to consciousness for the very first time. Adam, the first human, the first heartbeat, the first thought, the first wonder-filled gaze at paradise. But something was missing. It is not good for man to be alone. From Adam's rib came Eve, not just a companion, but a perfect complement. And when Adam first saw her, he didn't speak, he sang the world's first love song. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. The mystery of divine motivation. But why? Why would a perfect God create anything at all? He needed nothing, lacked nothing, was complete in himself. The answer reveals the most shocking truth about reality. God created because love demands expression. Perfect love cannot remain locked within itself. It must create, must give, must share its joy. You weren't an accident. You weren't a cosmic coincidence. You were created by love, for love, to experience love. Not a Big Bang theory, but with words. Just words. Let there be. And there was. Let us make. And it was made. Words so powerful that they continue to sustain reality even now. The same voice that spoke stars into existence is the same voice that whispers your name in the quiet moments of your life. But in this perfect paradise, God introduced something that would change everything: choice. Free will. The power to say no even to God himself. 2 trees stood in Eden, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And with that second tree came the universe's first prohibition, and the seeds of the greatest tragedy in history. Who would dare to challenge the perfect order of Eden? Who would risk destroying paradise itself? Enter the serpent, more cunning than any beast of the field. Ancient, intelligent, malevolent. Some call him Satan, the adversary. Others call him the father of lies. But in Eden, he was simply the tempter. And his target? Not Adam, the strong one, but Eve, in her innocence, her curiosity, her desire for wisdom. What happened on that day when innocence died? A conversation. Just a conversation. But words, we now know, have the power to create universes, or destroy them. Has God indeed said, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? Notice the strategy. Not outright denial. Not direct rebellion. Just a question. A tiny seed of doubt planted in the perfect soil of trust. Eve answered correctly at first, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.'" But the serpent pressed his advantage, "You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The first lie. The template for every temptation that would follow. God is holding out on you. You deserve more. You can be like God. Why did Eve listen? Why did Adam, standing right there, say nothing? Because the fruit promised everything humanity has always craved: knowledge without consequence, power without responsibility, equality with God without submission to God. The fruit looked good for food, it appealed to physical appetite. It was pleasant to the eyes, it appealed to aesthetic desire. It was desirable to make one wise, it appealed to intellectual pride. Every temptation you've ever faced follows this exact pattern. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. How did paradise die? Slowly, then all at once. She took. She ate. She gave to her husband who was with her, and he ate also. And their eyes were opened, but not to wisdom, to shame, to fear, to the terrible knowledge that they were now naked, exposed, vulnerable in ways they'd never imagined. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid themselves among the trees. Where are you? 3 words that still echo through every human heart. Not because God didn't know where they were, but because they needed to face what they had done. When innocence was lost, judgment became inevitable. Where once there had been perfect communion, now there was fear and hiding. Adam blamed Eve, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I ate." Eve blamed the serpent deceived me, and I ate. No one took responsibility. Everyone pointed fingers. The pattern of human nature was established in that moment. And God's judgment fell. The serpent would crawl on his belly. Eve would experience pain in childbearing and tension in marriage. Adam would struggle against thorns and thistles until he returned to dust. All of humanity would be barred from the tree of life. Paradise was lost. Death entered the world. But even in judgment, mercy whispered its promise. The woman's offspring would one day crush the serpent's head. They were expelled from Eden, flaming swords guarding the way back. But this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. Because outside of Eden, in a world now broken by choice and consequence, the real drama of human existence was about to unfold. And it would start with murder. Who were the first children born into this fallen world? Cain and Abel, brothers who would establish the pattern for every sibling rivalry, every jealousy, every act of violence that would follow. Cain, the farmer. Abel, the shepherd. Both sons of Adam and Eve. Both carriers of the divine image. Both capable of worship and murder. What triggered the first murder in human history? A worship service. An offering to God that should have been a moment of unity but became the catalyst for ultimate division. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground. God accepted Abel's offering but rejected Cain's. Why did this lead to murder? Because rejection feels like death, and wounded pride demands someone pay the price. God warned Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Sin personified. Crouching like a wild animal at the door of Cain's heart, waiting to pounce. Desire focused like a predator's hunger. But still, even then, choice remained. You should rule over it. How did humanity's first murder happen? With premeditation. In secret. Away from witnesses. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. When God came asking questions, Cain's response revealed how far humanity had already fallen. "Where is Abel your brother?" "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The first lie after Eden. The first deflection. The first refusal to take responsibility for another human being. But blood speaks. Abel's blood cried out from the ground for justice. And God's judgment made Cain a wanderer on the earth, restless, homeless, haunted by his crime. Yet even here, mercy appeared. God marked Cain, protecting him from the vengeance of others. Even murderers bear the image of God. Even the guilty deserve protection from mob justice. Building tension. But Cain's descendants would multiply violence. Lamech would boast of killing a man for wounding him, claiming vengeance 77-fold. The pattern was set: hurt leads to revenge, revenge leads to greater hurt, and violence spirals out of control. By the time of Noah, every imagination of human hearts was only evil continually. The consequences of that first bite of forbidden fruit had metastasized into a cancer that threatened to destroy creation itself. Something had to be done. Someone had to act. The reckoning was coming. Who was witnessing the moral collapse of his creation? The same God who had called everything very good now saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it broke his heart. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. But there was one man, just one, who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah. Righteous, blameless in his generation. A man who walked with God in a world that had forgotten God's name. What did God ask Noah to do? Build a boat. Not just any boat, an ark 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. Roughly the size of a modern football field, 3 stories tall. For what purpose? To survive the end of the world. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Why would a loving God destroy his own creation? Because sometimes love must act to prevent greater evil. The earth was filled with violence. Corruption had reached critical mass. If left unchecked, evil would consume everything good that remained. Justice delayed is not justice denied, it's mercy extended. But mercy has its limits, and those limits had been reached. How would Noah accomplish this impossible task? One day at a time, one board at a time, one faithful act of obedience at a time. For perhaps 100 years, he built while his neighbors mocked. Crazy old man building a boat where there's no sea. But Noah kept building, kept preaching, kept warning of judgment to come. When the animals began arriving, instinct older than civilization calling them from every corner of the earth, the world knew something unprecedented was about to happen. Lions walked peacefully beside lambs. Eagles flew alongside sparrows. Creatures that had never seen each other shared the same wooden refuge. And then it began. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Where once there had been dry land, now there was only water. Where mountains had touched the sky, now waves rolled endlessly. The world that had taken 6 days to create was unmade in 40 days and nights. Those who had mocked Noah's message now pounded on the ark's sealed door. But God himself had shut them in, and shut the world out. For 150 days, 8 souls floated above the graveyard of civilization. But God remembered Noah. He sent wind to dry the earth. The waters receded. The dove returned with an olive leaf. And finally, beautifully, the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. The new covenant. Noah's first act upon leaving the ark? He built an altar, offered sacrifices, worshipped the God who had saved them through judgment. And God made a promise, sealing it with a rainbow: never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. The bow in the clouds, God's weapon hung up, his promise of restraint painted across the sky in colors of hope. Humanity had a second chance. A clean slate. A fresh start. But human nature remained unchanged. And it wouldn't be long before pride would rear its ugly head again, this time in the form of a tower that would try to reach heaven itself. Who were these descendants of Noah who had forgotten so quickly the lessons of the flood? They were us. They were humanity doing what humanity does best: overestimating our abilities and underestimating God's sovereignty. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Unity. Communication. Shared purpose. Sounds ideal, doesn't it? What did they decide to build with their unity? Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Notice the motivation: make a name for ourselves. Prevent scattering when God had commanded them to fill the earth. Reach heaven by human effort when God had already provided the way to approach him. Why did this seem like a good idea to them? Because they had forgotten that they were creatures, not creators. They wanted to be remembered, to be famous, to achieve something permanent by their own power. The tower wasn't just architecture, it was theology. A statement that humanity could reach God without God's help, could achieve significance without divine blessing, could unify without divine guidance. How did God respond? With what almost seems like divine humor. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Picture the scene, the construction foreman shouting orders that his workers couldn't understand. The architect trying to explain blueprints in a language that no longer made sense. Brothers unable to communicate with brothers. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Babel, which means confusion, became the birthplace of all human languages, all ethnic divisions, all cultural barriers. But also, mysteriously, it became the preparation for a day when the gospel would be preached in every tongue and every tribe would worship together again. But God wasn't finished with humanity. In fact, his greatest work was just beginning. Because in the city of Ur, among the descendants of Shem, lived a man who would change everything. A man named Abram. And God was about to call him on a journey that would bless all the families of the earth. Who did God choose to restart his plan for humanity? Not a young man in his prime. Not a powerful king or wealthy merchant. But a 75-year-old man living comfortably in Ur of the Chaldeans, married to a barren woman, settled in his ways, with no children to carry on his name. Abram. Soon to become Abraham, father of many nations. But first, he had to become something he'd never been before, a man of faith. What did God ask of him? Everything. Get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Leave everything familiar. Go to a place I won't tell you about until you get there. And I'll make you the father of a great nation, even though your wife is barren and you're already old. Why Abraham? Why this promise? Because God's plan had always been to bless all the families of the earth. The curse of Babel would be reversed through blessing. What humanity had tried to achieve by building up, God would accomplish by calling out. How did Abraham respond? He went. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him. When faith meets impossibility, miracles become inevitable. But the journey wasn't easy. Famine drove them to Egypt. Fear led Abraham to lie about Sarah being his wife. Conflict with his nephew Lot forced them to separate. But through it all, God's promises held firm. Where God led them became known as the Promised Land, a place flowing with milk and honey, strategically positioned between the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The crossroads of the ancient world, where God's chosen people would become a light to the nations. The test of tests. But the greatest test was yet to come. Years passed, and still no child. Sarah, growing desperate, gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael was born. But this wasn't the promised son. When Abraham was 99 and Sarah was 90, God appeared again. I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah laughed. Who wouldn't? But God asked the question that cuts through every impossible situation, is anything too hard for the Lord? Isaac was born, the child of promise, laughter incarnate. But then came the ultimate test. Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Who could ask such a thing? The same God who had promised that through Isaac all nations would be blessed. What kind of test was this? The test of ultimate surrender. Would Abraham trust God even when God's commands seemed to contradict God's promises? Why would God ask for Isaac's life? To prove that Abraham's ultimate allegiance was to God himself, not to God's gifts, even the most precious gift of all. How did Abraham respond? With faith that defied logic. For 3 days they traveled to Mount Moriah. Isaac carried the wood for his own sacrifice. And when he asked, Father, where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham's faith found words that pierced heaven itself. My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. On the mountain, Abraham built an altar, bound his son, raised the knife. And at the last possible moment, do not lay your hand on the lad, or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son. discovered the deception, his heart filled with murderous rage. The days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Where did Jacob flee? To his uncle Laban in Haran, beginning a 20-year exile where the deceiver would be deceived, where the trickster would be tricked. But on his journey, sleeping with a stone for a pillow, Jacob had a dream that changed everything. Angels ascending and descending on a ladder reaching to heaven, and God standing above it, confirming the promises made to Abraham and Isaac. 20 years later, returning home wealthy but fearful, Jacob faced his greatest terror, meeting Esau again. But first, he had to face someone else. When Jacob was alone by the brook Jabbok, a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Who was this mysterious wrestler? God himself, appearing in human form. All night they struggled, and Jacob refused to let go until he received a blessing. What is your name? Jacob. Heel grabber. Deceiver. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. Israel, the one who wrestles with God. And from his 12 sons would come the 12 tribes of the chosen nation. The reunion with Esau was peaceful, brothers reconciled, both blessed, both prosperous. But the greatest drama was yet to come through Jacob's favorite son, the dreamer with the coat of many colors. Who was this 17-year-old boy who would save 2 nations and reveal the heart of God's providence? Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, born to Rachel in her old age, beloved beyond measure, and hated by his brothers for. The coat of many colors wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration of favoritism that poisoned family relationships. What made the brothers' hatred burn even hotter? Joseph's dreams. Listen to this dream which I have dreamed, that we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheep arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheep. And another dream, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Even Jacob was troubled. Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? Why did the brothers' resentment turn murderous? Because Joseph's dreams suggested he would rule over them all. The younger brother elevated above the older, the dreamer exalted above the practical men. Here comes this dreamer. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. How did God transform intended evil into ultimate good? Through a chain of events that would seem like coincidence to human eyes but revealed divine orchestration to eyes of faith. They threw Joseph into a pit, then sold him to Midianite traders for 20 pieces of silver. Where did those traders take him? To Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, God blessed Joseph. Everything he touched prospered. Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. But when Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of attempted assault, he was thrown into prison. Even in prison, God was with Joseph. The keeper of the prison put him in charge of all the prisoners. When Pharaoh's butler and baker were in prison, they had troubling dreams. Joseph interpreted them correctly. The butler would be restored, the baker would be executed. Joseph asked only one thing of the butler, remember me when it is well with you. The butler forgot. For 2 more years, Joseph languished in prison. When Pharaoh had dreams that no one could interpret, 7 fat cows devoured by 7 lean ones, 7 plump heads of grain consumed by 7 thin ones, suddenly the butler remembered the Hebrew prisoner. Joseph was rushed from the dungeon to the palace. Standing before the most powerful man on earth, he could have demanded his freedom first, could have negotiated his release. Instead, he said, it is not in me, God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph's interpretation and his plan for survival impressed Pharaoh so much that he made Joseph second in command over all Egypt. At 30 years old, the Hebrew slave became prime minister of a superpower. Why did God orchestrate these events? So that when the famine struck Canaan, Jacob's sons would come to Egypt for grain and find the brother they had betrayed 20 years earlier. They bowed before Joseph, not recognizing the beardless Hebrew boy in this powerful Egyptian official. His dreams had come true, but not as anyone had expected. Joseph recognized them immediately. He could have had them executed, could have taken revenge, could have let them starve. Instead, he tested them. Were they still the same heartless men who had sold their brother? Or had suffering taught them compassion? When they proved they would protect Benjamin even at the cost of their own freedom, Joseph could contain himself no longer. I am Joseph your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. for God sent me before you to preserve life." How could Joseph say this? Because he had learned the greatest truth in all of Scripture: "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." The family was reunited. Jacob lived to see his beloved son again. Israel, all 70 souls, moved to Egypt, where they would grow from a family into a nation. And that brings us to the end of Genesis, but not the end of the story. So here we are, at the end of Genesis. But are we really at the end? Or are we standing at the beginning of something even greater? Who have we met in this ancient story? We've met ourselves. Adam and Eve, hiding from God after making the wrong choice, that's us. Cain, struggling with jealousy and anger, that's us. The people of Babel, trying to make a name for ourselves, that's us. But we've also met Abraham, stepping out in faith when God calls. Jacob, wrestling with God and refusing to let go until he's blessed. Joseph, choosing forgiveness over revenge and trusting that God can work even betrayal for good. That could be us too. What have we discovered? That every human story follows the same pattern established in Genesis. We're created for paradise but thrust into struggle. We make choices that have consequences. We face impossible situations. We wrestle with God. And somehow, mysteriously, God keeps working everything, even our mistakes, into His greater plan. When you look at your own life, do you see the hand of God writing your story? Where you see only random events, might there actually be divine purpose unfolding? Why does any of this matter? Because the God who walked with Adam in Eden, who saved Noah through the flood, who called Abraham from Ur, who wrestled with Jacob by the brook, who elevated Joseph from prison to palace, this same God is active in your life right now. How will your story end? That's still being written. But here's what Genesis teaches us. With God, every ending becomes a new beginning. Every closed door opens to a greater room. Every betrayal can be transformed into blessing. The rainbow that God painted in the clouds after the flood, that's His promise that mercy triumphs over judgment. The ram caught in the thicket that died in Isaac's place, that's His promise that He will provide a substitute when we face judgment we deserve. The ladder Jacob saw reaching from earth to heaven, that's His promise that the way between God and humanity has been opened. Joseph's words to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good," that's His promise that no hurt in your life is beyond His power to redeem. So let me ask you the most important question of all. If God could take Joseph's betrayal and turn it into the salvation of nations, if He could transform Jacob the deceiver into Israel the patriarch, if He could make Abraham the father of faith from a childless old man, if He could bring light from darkness, order from chaos, life from death itself, what impossible situation in your life might He be preparing to transform? What closed door might He be about to open? What broken relationship might He be planning to restore? What dream that seems dead might He be about to resurrect? The story of Genesis isn't ancient history, it's the template for your story. The God of Genesis isn't a distant deity, He's the author of your life, writing a narrative of redemption that began before time and will continue into eternity. Your chapter is still being written. Your transformation is still possible. Your greatest breakthrough might be just one prayer, one act of faith, one moment of surrender away. The question isn't whether God is working in your life, He is. The question is, are you ready to step into the story He's writing? Are you willing to trust His plot twists? Will you believe that your current chapter, no matter how difficult, is setting up your greatest victory? Genesis ends with God's people in Egypt, but it's not really an ending, it's a setup for the greatest rescue story ever told. Your story might feel like it's ending too. But with the God of Genesis, every ending is just the beginning of something even more beautiful. What will you do with this truth? How will you respond to the God who is still speaking light into darkness, still calling people out of comfortable places into promises, still wrestling with those who won't let go, still transforming betrayal into blessing? The God of beginnings is waiting for your answer. You've journeyed through the incredible beginning of the biblical narrative, a story of creation, fall, and redemption that still shapes our world today. But this is just the first page of a much larger book. If you were captivated by this glimpse into Genesis, imagine what's next. We'll be diving deep into every book of the Bible, uncovering hidden meanings and revealing the profound insights of the canon. Don't miss a single story. Like this video and subscribe to the Biblical Canon for more in-depth insights. What part of the biblical story do you want to explore next? Let us know in the comments below.